Welcome to Cycling Fashion Week, the only global podcast purely focused on cycling style, fashion, aesthetics, and lifestyle. I am your host, Alex, and as always, Cycling Fashion Week is brought to you by absolutely nobody. We don't have a sponsor anymore, so we are free to say whatever we like. I am joined by my co-hosts, Warren and Tony, who is back this week after a little hiatus of, I'm going to say, a few months for Tony. Guys, how you both doing?
Yeah, I think it's been a couple months because we took a hiatus as a group, and then you guys came back with Italian Alex, who I listened. I was a fan for a couple episodes, and you did an incredible job. Seemed like got a lot of downloads with him, so maybe people prefer him to me, but I'm not going to ask them that because I don't need a hit to my ego. But yeah, after some personal time and dealing with some personal things, I'm back. I'm excited. As always, I've been paying lots of attention to the cycling fashion world. So, in the upcoming episodes, I'll have a lot of takes, sort of, bringing in stuff that we maybe haven't talked about that I noticed. But I'm excited to be back. I think the podcast is really in a good place right now. We really can hone our craft.
I want to quickly mention, you mentioned there's a lot of stuff happening right now. And I do want to, we're not going to go in depth on it now. I want to quickly mention Attacker or Attaque dropped a new collection that I think we're actually going to be reviewing in the near future, like actually reviewing the kit itself, not just talking about it aesthetically, which does look great. I just wanted to give that little teaser for our listeners because I think that'll be our first proper review we've ever really done.
From the visuals, I love the kit, but I like to read the comments, and a lot of people with the nope, underneath the posts, and I don't agree with them.
A lot of people are dumb.
Yeah, so. I was going to say, I don't have enough time to go look deep into their profiles and see what their style is, but I can see if they're saying nope to this kit, they're we love the earth tones, but you've got to be able to step outside that box.
Yeah, I think I'm done with earth tones. It's been going for a little while here, and I think I've had enough. I'm ready to move into some more colorful stuff here.
Yeah. I mean, in Wild Patterns, there's a couple brands I've seen recently that I hadn't seen before that I'll probably try and talk about, in upcoming episodes, or Chameleons, or no canals, but they're starting, do a little more bolds, or just adding more pattern stuff, but like very tastefully. I think there was the push for the earth tones was really good because there was a lot of brands that when they were doing patterns was not, they weren't doing it with that kind of artistic flair. I know Attacker's been having their artist series for a long time, but I think that there's a lot of brands now that really know how to kind of add pattern, but in a classy way.
All right. This week we have a special episode. We're joined by friend of the podcast and now repeat guest, David Millar, CEO, founder, Chapter 3, former pro cyclist with a variety of teams, including Slipstream, Cofidis, Saunier Duval. He joins us again, and he brought along James Carnes, who is the Chief Strategy Officer over at Chapter 3, and who used to be the vice president of brand strategy at Adidas. And what was really interesting about the interview is that James isn't really a cycling guy. He doesn't come at this from a cycling perspective. He comes at it more from a design perspective. And what was really interesting in the interview was to hear someone's perspective on the current state of cycling fashion, current trends, what brands are doing, but not necessarily from a cyclist point of view, someone who loves the sport and has been doing it forever, but more someone who comes from the industry, definitely from the sportswear industry, but who has more of a design eye on things. So he joined us. He joined the conversation. We had a long interview with these two guys. We went pretty deep on the state of the current cycling market, the boom and bust cycle that we saw from COVID and then post-COVID. And we also talked about what's next for Chapter 3. And James gave us a variety of hot analytical takes on the current state of cycling fashion, commenting on what some brands are doing, where things are going, where brands can take risks, and so on and so forth. So that was quite a deep, long interview that we had with these two gentlemen. So as a result, we won't be doing our regular segments on today's podcast. We will save this for our next edition in a few weeks. So we hope you will enjoy the interview with James and David coming today on Cycling Fashion Week. Okay, for our next segment on Cycling Fashion Week, we are welcoming two very special guests. We are welcoming back on friend of the podcast, former pro cyclist for Cofidis, Saunier Duval, Slipstream, Chapter 3 founder, and all-around legend, David Millar. And he is bringing along with him the Chief Strategy Officer for Chapter 3. His name is James Carnes. James comes to Chapter 3 following a long career at Adidas, where he was last the VP of Global Brand Strategy based out of Germany. And before that, he was a creative director for many years at Adidas. He was influential in Y3. He has a very strong design background. He's originally from Detroit, Michigan, and he joins us today from Germany. Guys, welcome to Cycling Fashion Week. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's good to see you guys again. And man, this sounds incredible. You guys are like full pro now. I thought you were stepping back.
Well, it depends on the week. Sometimes our mics don't work.
Well, we are former professional podcasters, as you know. We no longer have a sponsor, so that's when our mics stopped working. We stopped having a budget for functional mics.
We had to step up because the podcast landscape is getting so deep. Although I guess with the crash of cycling tips, we're losing a few, but I've seen some other niche ones pop up recently, and so we want to make sure we stay at a competitive. I mean, are we part of a community of cycling podcasters, or is it a competition that we're constantly fighting against? I see it as a competition. We want to be the top dog.
And we are. David, before we go into our main conversation, I think it might be helpful for you to properly give James an introduction on the podcast, because I gave a very kind of summary introduction of his background, but I don't think I did fully justice to who James is and what he brings to Chapter 3. And what we'll do today on the podcast is we'll have a conversation with James about the current state of cycling fashion, but from the point of view of someone who's a bit of an outsider, who doesn't come to this from a cycling background, but who has a very critical eye on design. So maybe, David, you can give James a bit of a more fleshed out introduction.
Go for it, David.
Yeah, going for it. Yeah, it goes back a couple of years. There's only 4 of us in Chapter 3 as owners. There's me, Mikkel B. Rasmussen, James, and my sister, Fran Millar. And a couple of years ago, it was just Mikkel and I. And Mikkel, in his previous background, he had worked with James, and his firm, his company had advised, and I think it goes back to 10, 12 years, isn't it? Or is it even longer than that, James, that you've been working?
Even longer, yeah.
Yeah, and so this would be coming in he'd mentioned James in 2020, and then in 2021, he said, I got to introduce you to James. I think things are going to be changing, and I would just love you to meet him. And these are the words Mikkel used. I think James is the best designer I've ever met, and also kind of regards his macro strategic kind of knowledge and experience over starting the very design. He started industrial design. I'll give you a full bio here now, James. Being an industrial designer, and then going into Adidas pretty young, but as a shoe designer, as a product designer, and rapidly moved through the ranks and quickly moved into creative direction and then overall global strategy. I knew nothing about cycling, and this is why Mikkel wanted me to meet James, because James has an amazing vision and experience in many sports, and also the crossover into fashion, which I think is obviously relevant to this conversation. It was like the missing link. And so I started to get to know James about 18 months ago, and then James became considered to be one of the co-founders of what the new Chapter 3 is and going to be. And he's kind of been completely opening my eyes to and allowing me to see the world differently. I mean, I think we've spoken about this before. I've spoken about to other people. You have a local bike ride you do all the time, but then you do it with somebody new and you see everything for the first time. And that's been what it's been like with James the last 18 months.
Great, interesting, and so we'll get into that later. Kind of getting James's perspective on cycling fashion and what he has brought to your eyes. But I guess, David, one question I want to ask you. Tony alluded to it early on in the podcast. He mentioned that the podcasting landscape has changed with cycling tips kind of suddenly not disappearing, but I guess falling apart would be an appropriate way of putting it. And it's probably emblematic of something that we see more broadly in the cycling world. Wasn't something that we saw in the last couple of years just following COVID. There was a bit of a boom in sales for the overall cycling industrial complex. And things seem to be going the other way pretty quickly right now. We're seeing a lot of brands have massive sales. Again, we mentioned, cycling media undergoing pretty deep changes. Like, can you tell us your perspective on what's going on in the overall cycling market, be it bike companies, be it apparel companies, be it media, and so on and so forth?
Hindsight is always 2020. But if we go back to 2020, the cycling industry had its eyes wide shut, in the sense there was this perfect storm of all of a sudden anomalous events with lockdown and nobody having anything to do but sport, bicycles becoming kind of interesting, becoming a really kind of, I think for a lot of people, retouching with their youth. It was kind of a very weird phenomenon that went on in 2020. And with it came the perfect storm of being the supply chain collapsing, kind of demand far exceeding, and the whole industry getting overexcited. And if we go back to I'd say from post 2012, where it was booming, post the London Olympics, and it's still riding the wave of the Lance Armstrong era. What had been happening from about 2014, 15, there was a decline. And we were in a descending spiral as an industry. The thing is, most of the people that work in the industry genuinely are fans of the sport and love it and will bat for it kind of every day of the week. So when I think things were pretty desperate in 2018, 19 for the industry as a whole, more shops were closing, everyone was trying to figure out what they're going to do next, how do they get through this never-ending descending spiral. And then the pandemic hit and the bike boom began. And I think everybody was just like, well, yeah, this is finally everyone understood why we love it. And this is amazing. What we didn't take into account were the absolute series of crazy events that allowed that to happen. And then what's happened is, and again, this only goes back to the love of the people who run the sport. And in each of we've spoken about this for all different islands of cycling, which I'm sure James will talk about a bit later as well. The road cycling kind of crew said, this is amazing. We're going to turn this into the biggest sport in the world. Let's get more bikes. Let's create more brands. People were even creating brands during the pandemic. Same with mountain biking, same with commuting. E-bikes is probably going to weather better because that does seem to not be slowing down because it's completely different demographic. And then what happened was, just as the supply chain started to pick up again in 2021, the demand started to fall off. And all of a sudden, you had this long tail of orders kind of coming in to numerous brands, and all of the factories were delayed. So you were putting orders in 2020, and all of a sudden, instead of it being 6 months, it might be 8 or 9 months. They were missing seasons. So you started to have this long tail kind of absolute compounding effect of basically the demand dropping off, supply arriving at the wrong time, and then people not being able to pay because obviously they didn't have the product at the right time to do it. Then when they did have it, there wasn't enough people to buy it. And I think we're seeing it across the whole industry: apparel, bikes, components as well. They've got so many home trainers. Look at even the platforms, Zwift, Strava, Wahoo. It's everything from digital to hardware to soft goods. And I think the irony is, if you were to probably then go back to 2019 and take a steady line through it to where we possibly could be next year, it's all going to be increasing. It's just we went for a huge spike, kind of hockey stick in 2020, and everyone thought it was going to carry on. So now everyone's having to reset and go back to kind of being pragmatic. And in order to be pragmatic, you're going to have to get rid of a lot of stuff.
It's more about the way in which the industry had planned for a future of growth that was going to be almost infinite. and things just kind of normalized, and that didn't happen. It doesn't seem to be so much people who joined the sport in the last 2 years just dropping off currently. That it doesn't seem to be the case. It's more of a lack of growth than people just leaving the sport altogether.
You know, I know there's a lot of issues because of the pandemic with supply chains, and it's just deeper than sort of good business planning, but it seems as if it's just bad business planning, because it's a once in a lifetime thing. Like Wahoo is kind of the perfect example of it, where they're, you know, people are stuck inside. They want to do activities, whether they're cyclists who are already cyclists and they weren't really into trainers. So they had this boom. Everyone's buying a trainer. Everyone wants to get on Zwift. Like I remember early in the pandemic, even when it got nice out, people were still quite cautious about riding outside or riding in a group. So people, even in kind of nicer weather, were riding trainers. And the idea that anyone with even a little bit of foresight would think that would sustain and last, to me, is sort of crazy when I hear this. And then there's these massive layoffs, and then like the hiring practices they did. It just seems wild to me. Like I'm pretty, you know, I like to. I'm a great predictor of things. That's one of my great skills. And I said, you know, I predicted I predicted the collapse of cryptocurrency years ago.
The only one too. So.
The only everyone thought it was a bull market, and I said no, this is going down. But you know, I said to Warren and I would be riding, and the roads would be packed and all this kind of stuff. And I said, these people, once this lightens up, these people are going back to the mall, right? And there's sort of although as Alex sort of said, they're not going to have a, you know, maybe new cyclists aren't stopping, but there was a terminal velocity that was going to happen. Like you're not going to keep getting new cyclists year over year. So the fact that these companies were producing, hiring, trying to sell at this level, that like what 2020 and 2021 to me just seems like bad business practice. Like ride a little bit of the wave up and then realize like, okay, things are going to steady out and let's not go crazy. That's how I would see it, but I'm not in that. I'm a critic, not an active participant in the business.
Tony is a great predictor of things once they've actually happened. That's a special skill that he has.
No, I got receipts on the crypto stuff. I got text messages with Alex and Warren about how I said, I can't believe anybody's buying this stuff. It's a scam. It's a Ponzi scheme.
Tony, what's your S&P 500 forecast for this year?
It's not going to be great.
Yeah, we have to get James input on this. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you guys said two things that I was going to respond to. Like, one of them, I think, Alex, you said like everything normalized, and I think actually everyone expected things to normalize. I think that's what led to Tony's prompt about like bad business planning. I think it was just bad industry expectations. You know, like everybody went into COVID thinking everything's going to normalize, you know, as soon as possible. You remember in the beginning, people were like, it's going to take 20 days. We'll be locked up for 20 days. It was like, you know, a year later, everyone's like 20 more months, you know, like, so everyone expected it would be quick. And then that just kept compounding the issue. So the companies, and there were very few, the companies that scaled back right in the beginning are the only ones that are in a really good, lean, profitable situation. Almost everybody just hung themselves out to dry. They didn't get rid of, you know, they didn't downsize, they didn't scale back. They all tried to prepare for it to be over, assuming everything would go back to normal. And if you look at just the sports industry, cycling is just a small part of it. They all have like 3 to 6 times the inventory they would normally start the year with. You know, and that's already like, you know, having too much inventory at the beginning of the year is already like a bit of a scary thing. You got to explain it to shareholders. It's going to be a bad year, man. And I think that compounded with two other things. One is during that time, nobody focused on doing anything new. You know, they were just trying to survive. They're just trying to like deal with inventory and supply chain, like David said. So, I mean, go back, you know, a few years from now and look at this 2-year period and then try and pinpoint like the new trend that started or the new exciting thing that started. So the companies didn't bring anything new, but unfortunately, we all changed our behavior. Like we all changed what we buy. We all changed what we have in our closet. And I think that's where David's point is really clear. Like everyone rode this excitement around running and cycling and all these things you could do. And now everyone's got enough and they're looking for something new. And there's too much and it's all the same. So there's nothing new, but there's plenty of the old. So it's going to be a tough year and it's a great time to change though. It's the Wild West again in a good way. Like there's nothing but opportunity coming, I think, in the whole sports industry.
Hey, it's not true that no one brought anything new. Cervello brought that ugly 3-pointed stem that we ragged on this podcast. James, you're clearly showing you're not a cycling guy by making these kind of comments.
Exactly.
Now that you're connected with David, do you have a road bike? Do you ride it all?
I'm not going to tell you the road bike that his sister got for me, but I can just tell you she was a CEO of Sky Team, so her connections go deep, and I was out blown away. Like, I have a bike I don't deserve.
She got you a Chinarello?
What?
That would have been okay.
Yeah, yeah. He's got an actual X Pro bike. Yeah, and I think one of the kind of reasons for that was because James literally he'd never owned a road bike or a high performance road bike, and it was a kind of experiment for my sister to go, here you go, basically Team Ineos kind of rider's bike, like in the season for him, and now try and to see just what road cycling is. And it was really interesting.
She wanted to throw me in the deep end, and she said, I think it was great. She said, you need to learn and understand the sharpest edge of this sport to really be able to understand the community and people and what they aspire to. So I've been privileged. I got to say, that's a privilege to have that bike and to be able to understand so quickly, like, what it feels like.
Have you caught the bug? Because I mean, that's an interesting thing that I think cycling has, and I do all sorts of sports. I'm doing the World Cup convinced me to do an indoor soccer league in a couple of weeks, and I've tried everything under the sun and enjoy it all. But cycling has a very sort of specific addiction that I haven't really found with other, despite the love I have for, growing up as a Canadian playing hockey and snowboarding and tennis and all these things. And that I think, from a business standpoint positions it differently, is that when people get into it, they get very into it, like more so than I would say most other sports, especially as an adult. A lot of people will, maybe pick up tennis or something as an adult and play it recreational to keep them active, but then cycling becomes their identity. Have you sort of caught that bug at all? And you sort of coming into the industry, working on a brand like Chapter 3, working with a former pro, like, do you understand that cycling is sort of a passion beyond for pretty much all cyclists?
Yeah, and I think that's like diving immediately into the crux of where David and I have fun together, because my background in different sports has given me an insight into like why people get deep into those different sports, right? So you find somebody who gets deep into running, and all of a sudden they've got every single piece of data collection equipment, and they're tracking their miles, and they're keeping track of their nutrition and everything. Like, they've been running for like 3 months, and all of a sudden they're a runner. And cycling's like magnified by 100. But I think one of the challenges that we've been talking about is that's not just a cool thing, that's also an inhibitor. Like, that's what makes the sport sometimes super exciting, because there's this elite level of knowledge and all of these codes about like what are the things you do to be really good at the sport that completely filter out people who might want to join. And that's the thing we've been talking about, is like, how do you take something that's so amazing because it's allowing people to like constantly race at a higher level, but inherently is non-inclusive because it feels to a lot of people like you have to cross all these barriers and kind of have the perfect bike and the perfect shoes and know how to click your pedals. That like you have to learn so much. It's worse than golf.
And that's exactly the kind of gatekeeping that we provide on this podcast. We set the rules so that we keep people away from the sport.
But even within that, the physiology of cycling's hard, right? Especially if you do even get into it for like a summer where you go hard. And I've been riding road bikes for 15, 16 years, and I've had a lot of sort of ups and downs and time off. And it's very difficult to take too much time off, unless you're maybe David and you're a former pro, and go from this where you had the summer and you're riding all the time, you're fit, and then you can't get up the basic hill, in your neighborhood. And it's kind of a sport you can't do like half-heartedly, I find, to enjoy. I mean, some people might say no, like they just go for a casual 10K ride. But once you get deep into it and you're used to these big rides, like I grew up playing hockey, and I can go years without playing hockey and then just like jump on a men's league, jump on a shinny game. And it's all kind of there. I don't have to be that fit. I can just kind of play and enjoy myself. But if I ride a bike, if I've gone a year off the bike because something, I just wasn't into it, and I jump back on, I'm in agony, and I almost don't want to do it, the work that it does to get like back into shape. There's the sort of gatekeeping that we love, and then there's a physical inhibitor that's not as easy as maybe some of the other skill sports where you can kind of be an old out of shape person and still enjoy it.
Well, it's hard to keep up physiologically, like you say, because the all of the musculature that you have to develop to be good at cycling you don't build up just by walking around. Like even if you're a runner, if you're walking, you're building muscle for running. If you're walking, you're not building muscle for cycling the same way. And if you're running, you're actually messing things up. And that's to answer your earlier question. My problem is I keep running. So every time I might get into cycling, I'll get back into running a little bit, and then that'll just detract from it. I think it also is just, it's a distance sport. So like when you hop on the bike and you feel out of shape and you look up after a couple of minutes, the pack is gone, or if you're with David's disappeared. And that's not encouraging.
I mean, less so these days, to be perfectly frank. And I'm living in fear now because of my Cape Epic adventure in March. So I'm pushing it as long as I can to have to start training. But separate to that, one of the things that is an inhibitor to me, and I was just, when you were talking, Tony, is when you get to that unfit stage of being a cyclist. The hardest thing for me is that I know it's going to take me 15, 20 minutes to get ready, because I've got to find the right clothes. I've got to make sure, and if they're not there, make sure my bike's all perfect. And if I haven't been looking after it regularly, that's going to be a bit of a mission. Also, I've forgotten, I can just look out the window or open the door and know what to wear if I'm doing it regularly. If I haven't done it, I kind of have to kind of think about this, and I overthink it, and then trying to find my shoes. Oh, and they're dirty. Actually, I'm going to have to clean those. Which hole am I going to, and because obviously I am a complete stylist. And so I'll lose 15, 20 minutes compiling all my kit. And all the motivation I had is just evaporating as I'm doing that. And whereas when I was in my year of running, I would just chuck on my decathlon kit. I'd have nice trainers and nice my chapter 3 tube socks. But otherwise it was just like, just chuck it on, bang it out, go. And so it's interesting how, and this is the very reason Cycling Fashion Week is, and this is what I've been educating James on, how much of what we do is about that style, that aesthetic, that kind of the codification of it, because it's the identity you have. And obviously with Cycling Fashion Week, what's your tagline, Alex?
We are the global authority when it comes to cycling, fashion, style, aesthetics, and lifestyle. We set the rules, and as Warren says, we enforce them.
I thought you walked the line between satire and
authority. Exactly. We walk. Well, that's a great segue. We walk a very fine line between satire, self-deprecation, and elitism.
Yeah.
That was a review we got on Apple Podcasts where they were sort of unsure what we were doing, whether it was a joke or serious, and it's really both.
Yeah, we play on both fronts.
That's the important part.
Okay, so next topic, we wanted to talk to you guys about having both David and James on the podcast. David as the founder, the CEO of Chapter 3, and James as the Chief Strategy Officer. You guys recently announced a new direction or a new chapter, so to speak, for Chapter 3. So we wanted to ask you about this. What's new and exciting, and what's coming for Chapter 3?
We've been a little bit esoteric on that in the sense that it's two clearly defined products, and they'll be slightly staggered but are unified. The first one is the fourth version of the Brompton Chapter 3, which has been one of my favorite projects and the longest partnership we've had, to the degree where we've essentially become a factory partner to Brompton, who, going back to earlier in the podcast, when James was talking about and all we've seen through the pandemic, Brompton, their CEO, Will Butler-Adams, I remember when I first met him in 2015, I went to visit their smaller factory, and he showed me around and he was talking about what we were going to do, and we didn't know yet. And his advice I didn't listen to, and now it's kind of like ringing through my head all the time. He said, be patient, don't be greedy. And Brompton are just amazing at that. They just slowly build, they compound. And we've been very fortunate to build an amazing relationship with them. And with that, we have what is becoming, it was an biannual release of a collaborative bike that I worked with their designers and engineers to develop, which is just stripping it down, making it more of a BMX street bike. It's one of my favorite bikes, and I think everyone who knows me knows that. But then with that introduced me to the whole urban cycling world, which was a cycling fashion world I'd never been part of, in the sense that I'd never wanted to be a road cyclist in the city. I just always wanted to kind of take taxis or tubes and not see bikes. And then the Brompton kind of changed my life in the sense that now I'm that guy who didn't want people to know he was a cyclist using a bike in the center in urban situations and with no kind of flags of, oh, I'm a bike rider. And then James coming on board really kind of allowed me to kind of dig deeper on that idea, is how do we transfer all the road tech and racing experience and partners we have with his what started with running tech and kind of pure sports tech and macro tech and Adidas and the alchemy he had and created with Adidas, and kind of they were the first ones to do the collaborations and have success with them. So yeah, so it's that's the Brompton V4, which there'll be lots of coming out about that, and it's middle of February that will be released globally. But then on February the 1st, we've got something else coming in. James can explain that.
Yeah, we're launching a shoe. We have a shoe for that we've created together with David. It kind of goes with the Brompton. I mean, at least it lives within the same spirit, and the design of it is intended to kind of create a similar experience that the Brompton creates for people, riding through the city. From my background, good design really, kind of does two things, hopefully both at the same time. But, one is it should create the ability to do a task better, right? So, a lot of times you're looking for gear that allows you to ride faster, break records, do things, that you couldn't do before. And it should make the experience better. And sometimes making the experience better is making things more stylish in the case of like, apparel or footwear, more comfortable. Um, but also it should provide some utility, right? Like if, nothing worse than buying something that looks great and it either falls apart in the worst case, bad quality, but it just doesn't do anything better, you know? And you notice that when it's a deficit, like if zippers don't work or snaps don't work. But, when's the last time you bought a pair of shoes and they actually do something, or they allow you to do something that you currently can't do? Doesn't happen that often, right? Like they might be a little more comfortable, a pair of running shoes, might be some great, a jersey that's just, a little bit lighter or has a little bit better zipper or something like that. But so the task that we put in front of ourselves was we looked at the Brompton and said, not just the Brompton, but a lot of people in general, they're riding in the city, and not just for commuting. I think there's this whole idea that, if you ride in the city, you're a commuter. But there's a whole community of people who ride because they love it. They just really love riding in the city with a group, without a group, to all destinations. They probably don't need to commute. They have a car, or they could take public transport, but it just fills their soul. And for someone like me, who again, I've ridden a mountain bike a lot in my life, but I never was really a road cyclist. I at least understood how much better riding is when you can clip in. And anybody who hasn't, that's one of those small thresholds that I had to learn, was like, what do you need to clip into your pedals for? And then you do it once and you're like, oh my God, why wasn't I doing this, since I was born? So it basically merges that with the fact that the best shoes for clipping in, once you get off, you can't not walk in, right? And I think everybody who's cycled has that feeling of, being the sort of, dressed like a superhero, walking like a penguin into a coffee shop saying like, my ride was great. And now what, right? Like, I can't wait to take my coffee and sit down, because the walk to the barista and back is like the worst part of the entire experience. So knowing that there's a lot of people out there who ride Bromptons who love the ability to like fold that thing up, run down the stairs, unfold it, ride to work maybe, or just ride to meet friends, fold it up, hop on a subway, unfold it, ride again. The utility that thing provides doesn't exist in a shoe that you can like clip in and then get off and walk in. And that's all we did. We just took the two together, and I brought in a lot of the background that I had in making soccer cleats or football boots, depending on where you're from. There's like plate technologies. There's a lot of cushioning technologies that come from running. We built our own last shoe shape. Like if you think about it, no one's really created a shoe shape, a last shape that is great for being on a bike and then great once you're off the bike walking around. There's running shoe lasts, and then there are cycling lasts, both of which are phenomenal. But that was a starting point. We worked with a company in Germany called FIL who helped us develop that. So it's been a really fun project, and we finally got to the point where we got the thing made and produced and are launching it and making it available to people. And we're excited to see how they like it.
Is that shoe going to be functional only within the Brompton ecosystem, or can you clip into, you know, a specific type of pedal that can go on another bike?
It's definitely not exclusive to Brompton. What we ended up doing, and this was even the bigger challenge, you know, to do, you know, without the resources of a $20 billion company behind you, which is what I'm kind of used to at Adidas. You know, it's me, David, Mikkel, and Fran. We realized that there are people who want a 2-bolt SPD, you know, typical mountain bike kind of clip in. And that's currently the best we could do. You know, we looked into 3-bolt, but then that's really specialized anyway for real road biking. So any pedal that's got that, you can clip in. We also noticed, though, a lot of people who are doing that, getting on and off the bike, also have, you know, one-sided. So they'll have a flat pedal on the other side. Or there's a lot of people who ride Bromptons that just, they have spikes or you know, their own custom sort of bear claw pedals. And so we did a flat pedal version too, without having to open up, you know, a whole set of separate molds, which I will say, David and I were sort of patting ourselves in the back from a sustainability standpoint, because we didn't have to, you know, waste all this stuff. So we'll have 2 versions of that. One of them is just open-ended. Anybody who's got, you know, an SPD. I will say this: the way that we engineered it, though, is we said, if you buy like an SUV, anybody who buys a car buys an SUV, you want to be able to drive that thing off road. It might be that you do it once in 5 years, and you're so thankful when you do have it that one time, or you know, you guys are from Canada, you get stuck in a snowstorm, you put it in 4-wheel drive, and you're like, oh my God, I can't imagine, like, if I didn't have this. And again, it's like once a winter, but you don't want that to inhibit you. You know, it'd be a bad thing driving around the city. So we approach the shoe the same way, and you don't ever have to use it, even if you buy the version that is SPD compatible. It's lightweight, it's flexible. You don't ever have to use it to clip in on a pedal, and it's still a great cycling and a walking shoe. And I think that's a thing that you'll have to try it on. Like, it's hard to sell people on something they're not going to be able to see, but it doesn't have a huge full plate. It's not super thick. It uses, again, this special injection material that you have on the World Cup soccer cleats, that's flexible and stable at the same time. And for some reason, I don't know why, it's just never been used. You know, of all of the product all the shoes that David sent me from all the brands that I tore apart, they all use nylon, which is great material, but it's a very specific one. So, you know, it feels really good that we're doing this for the right reasons. It also felt really good that we uncovered all of these stones. You know, we turned over all these stones and we're like, well, wait a minute, why isn't anybody doing that? Well, wait a minute, how come this hasn't been done? That's what we created. And we think that represents a lot of what David said. Like, that's where we're going, is we want to continue to create products that are like best in class, but we also really want to see more people riding in the city. We think it's the future of, you know, transportation. You guys know how much it just fills your life with something either athletic and rewarding, or something that's just part of a community, or it's just fun, period.
I actually just bought a new commuter bike. We don't really talk about
the anti-Brompton. He bought an anti-Brompton.
Oh, man.
Yeah, like a 35-pound steel bike made out of Finland. I was just gonna say, like, I've been riding around that a bit, and it is like winter here, so it's quite cold. But like, just riding this like 7-speed commuter bike is like just the joy I got just from being like, oh, this is fun compared to my road bike. I think that's great that you're trying to bring that even in sense of commuting, because that even just riding a commuter bike. So I think it's great you're trying to bring that back. And then one other thing I was gonna say is, you mentioned how you've made an effort to make it comfortable with on the bike and off. It made me think of Adidas put out those Velo Sambas, the ones that clip in, and I read a couple reviews and just said they're like horribly uncomfortable off the bike.
Yeah, I was gonna I was gonna ask the exact same question.
We'll go for it.
No, just I was
Okay, so first of all,
especially with my affiliation with the brand. So
I'll save James from this one. So I've owned Chrome, Quat, lovely company. Not many companies actually do kind of the SPD urban shoes, because we call them urban shoes, don't we? Because that's always the thing. If you go onto their website, you go through the category, it's city commuter, which already is putting you off. And then you get to it and they got horrible kind of top sole design. Kind of just look like upper design. But then when the Velo Samba came out, because of the resources Adidas had, the only reason I noticed it was because so many influencers were releasing on the same day. And this is what's mad when you're at a brand like Adidas. It's they're not paying those people. It's if their PR agency has said, okay, we've got these new kind of urban shoes coming out. I'd have loved to have a pair. I'd have posted it because it's cool that a big brand actually does something for cycling. I didn't get a free pair, by the way. So I bought a pair and used them in the summer and during the Tour de France, doing all my Brompton stuff. And they were like the chromes. You couldn't walk in them. Get blisters because there was no. And so the concept that from the experience I had and relaying this to James over the last 18 months was I would love the shoe to be 90-10. So a lot of if you look at the Velo Samba, it's 90% cycling, 10% walking. But how do we get 100% functionality for cycling, 100% walking, but actually tilted to 90-10 design and engineering? So the chapter 3 shoe is 90% for walking and 10% for cycling, but outdoes all the competitors in both. Because I figure if you've actually done it and lived a cycling life in a city in an urban situation, and this is the whole thing, and it'd be interesting to hear all three of your opinions on this. Would you ever wear a cycling brand to work? Like a Rafa t-shirt, and perhaps Tony, especially coming from the skating background? No. Why?
You see, David, what I need the likes of Edward Green or Crockett and Jones to make an SPD compatible shoe to go to work. That's what I need.
Alex is quite the flashy dresser due to his industry. I mean, I come from a slightly more creative, well, so does Tony. We're both in like more creative industry, season architecture, and I'm in advertising, well, now in sort of the tech world. In my industry, and I can't speak for Tony so much, but my industry, wearing like a logo t-shirt, whether it's cycling or whatever, would be acceptable. And for me as a personal choice, I wouldn't do that. And I don't know, I don't really see myself wearing a cycling brand to work, especially like I wouldn't wear chrome shoes to work, for example.
So Tony, this is a good point. So this is where I think the alchemy created with James and I, and with what you guys is with Cycling Fashion Week, and how the three of you are so different and not come from the confinements of the racing world, but seeing it as kind of connoisseurs, kind of who just appreciate it and like the codification, etc., but don't take it too seriously. James did that slightly as well, from a very different perspective. But what I find gutting to me is that I can't wear a cycling brand. Like, they don't make cool stuff or have a brand that I can wear. I'm happy to wear like a sub brand of a sports company if they've got the right collaboration or something. But the identities are so strong, which is they're victims of their own success. And Tony, you know this. So one of the things that when James was younger was created one of the first kind of fashion brand, sport brand collaborations, which was Y3. And this is back exactly 20 years ago now. And that was where it started. And I think that's where he starts to go, oh, Adidas can be worn in the city.
I mean, the other thing about it was, okay, so there's two things I want to say. Like, one is, when David talked about the 90-10, the challenge that I had with David being, sort of the recipient of this product was the 10% still had to work, right? Like, just because you're using it 10% of the time, we're designing a shoe for a guy who's ridden in the Tour de France. He's not gonna give me room for like a product to be kind of, not so decent, clip in, but it's not so good. And then the 90% was not just about comfort and being able to walk around. It also had to be something that fit into his lifestyle, but also represented his identity as a cyclist. And that's where the bigger picture comes in. If you play soccer or you play basketball, you want to be able to wear articles of clothing and footwear outside of the sport to show to people that's part of your identity, right? Like, that's a good reason, part of the reason why we as people in this world like pick sport, because it does include you and does give you an identity. So, Tony, your point earlier, like going through all of those steps to really learn about cycling and understand it and get addicted to it, those are important to you. But cycling is one of those few sports where what do you wear when you're not on the bike to show people that you're a cyclist? Like what do you have available? And that's where the Velo Samba is a great example of trying to like extend that. Now, we try to outdo that from functional standpoint where that with the SPDs on, you can walk around and it still doesn't touch the ground. It's a smaller plate and it has full cushioning. No other shoe has that built in. A lot of brands have tried to do this, but those three things are always, one of them is compromised. But the real thing that I think will make cycling a bigger sport for more people to participate in, particularly in the city environment, is you want to be able to wear the thing you're passionate about most while you're not doing it. And there's not a lot of cycling stuff that you can wear. You don't, even if you have the best waterproof jacket for cycling and you're like, man, this thing is so good, I would love to wear it out tonight. It's too tailored. It's got, the drop tail is just doesn't quite fit. Like there are so many things about it that just stay within the cycling world and they're perfect for cycling. There's an opportunity for more pieces of apparel. And this is, our first thing with footwear, to extend the identity of being a cyclist or a rider. That's always the crux between me and David is like, do you have to be called a cyclist or you can also, just be a really high-end rider? And fitting that style for David, we drew out a little bit on BMX from his past to create something that was relevant for the street for him as well.
First off, I'll say why I don't often try and wear cycling stuff. Well, one of the reasons is I just always want to look like Samuel Beckett wherever I go. He's my fashion inspiration, and I just try to. But I think a lot of the problems with sort of cycling, and this is where Y3 solved that years ago with the kind of sport to sort of what now really one of the sort of things that developed into the huge thing that is streetwear, but wearing that sort of off is that it focused on the style and not just slapping a logo on. Like that's kind of the problem I think with cycling off bike stuff is that like I'm a t-shirt wearing guy. I like wear t-shirts. I work in an industry that I can wear a t-shirt to, but I can buy some nice t-shirts with different sort of, weight and cut and stuff that have nothing on it that feel like give more style than buying essentially what is a cheap t-shirt, but I'm paying $90 because someone screen printed the logo on it. And so this t-shirt itself actually gives me no style. It's not like, I'd say like Uniqlo makes these kind of great heavyweight tees. It's they've got a kind of a nice silhouette to them. They're not that expensive. And there's other t-shirts I wear. And so like, that's kind of one of the problems is they're not really bringing fashion into the off bike. They're kind of just bringing their logo and their brand. And sort of a little bit off topic with that, but talking about, Chrome, first off, because I got to make hot takes. That is the ugliest shoe ever made. That Chrome clip-in shoe is just, it looks like the sort of, I don't even know how to describe it. Like the granola has their own, chicken farm would wear it or something. It was terrible. But, the Velo Samba is cool. I wear Sambas outside of it. But anyways, speaking of what you're doing, this kind of goes to the industry where a lot of shopping's online. Is that going to be sort of a difficult thing to kind of prove to people that this is a really comfortable, walkable shoe that you can ride in, that you can, clip into? Because the predecessors to it, the Samba, the Chrome, they were so hard to walk in, so uncomfortable that I think it's going to stick in a lot of people's minds, right? So you need to,
They did some damage to the whole concept.
They did, yeah. Shit.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to take time. And like you say, we don't have stores to start with. We're going to be selling this thing online. We hope that we'll get some people that will get the shoes too, that wear them and talk about them, do some classic unboxing and then, testing the shoes out. We've tested them. We're pretty confident there. But, Tony, it's a really good point going beyond just the shoes. Like what's your favorite cycling brand? Or like what's one of the cycling brands you really like to wear?
Besides Chapter 3, obviously, Attacker. Attacker. Let's just not give David too much confidence, but I love Attacker as like on the bike, Australian brand. Attacker. If you're in Quebec with Alex.
And as good as they are, is there anything that matches like the style of the things you wear when you're not on the bike? Like what's your favorite brand off bike?
Honestly, probably Gap, which isn't that impressive, but I like that sort of. I like the sort of more like stuff like Gant, that kind of sweaters, Armor Lux. That sort of is my style. That kind of
more
Yeah, sort of
classic, iconic
classic
pieces.
sort of
Also,
yeah.
I'm going to jump in there because obviously we met in real life. You're a pretty well built dude. You're an actual
Yeah.
classic hockey player, which means you are limited on kind of males high fashion, and the slim fits just won't work for you.
Big and
No,
tall.
it doesn't. It doesn't. I look. I look. I mean, I used to wear the slim fits back in the day, but no, a slim fit pant is not. It doesn't work on me the way it works on Warren. That's for sure.
Slim fits in the canal anyway in 2023.
It's all baggy from here on out.
Can I just make a comment, James? I just want to go back to something you said, and then we'll segue into more cycling related stuff. Get your hot takes on the current state of the cycling fashion market. But you said something about how people want to show their identity off the bike, and they want to show people that they're a cyclist, and how sport can kind of creep into more regular fashion. And I guess one thing that's been unstoppable in the last few years in the world of fashion in general has been the slow creep of what we call Gorpcore into regular fashion, with the likes of Arc'teryx, Patagonia, Salomon, Merrell just being worn on the street. Like, do you think, what's your diagnosis of this? And do you think it could happen for cycling eventually? Because now you got guys on Wall Street that are on trading desks and they're all wearing like Patagonia vests or Arc'teryx vests. Like, do you think that could ever happen for cycling?
I think we could do like a 3-part series on that whole, evolution of what you wear from sport and how it makes it to the street. But it's really case by case and sport by sport, right? Like let's just take Lululemon. The reason that like 90% of women you see today have, as part of their wardrobe, leggings and tights that they wear all the time is because of Lululemon, right? Like they finally made an amazing fabric that women could wear to yoga and then outside of yoga. And again, 90% of those aren't worn for yoga. So there are anomalies like that. But I think for an entire sport to start creating product that allows you to showcase your identity, outside of playing the sport is a bit tougher. Soccer suffers from that. Like, what do you wear? What if you're like even a pro soccer player, what do you wear off the pitch? You don't. You wear maybe some Sambas. You maybe wear some, a replica jersey. But cycling's a little bit stuck in that same thing, and people don't wear replica jerseys, or nobody's rushing out to get Tour de France jerseys, after it's over. So I think there's an opportunity to create new pieces that don't exist. Now the danger is a little bit what Tony said, that people just start going out making standard items and putting their logo on it. And the question you got to ask yourself is like, is that making me live and breathe my identity as a cyclist, or am I actually just like a billboard for this brand's t-shirt and basic sweatshirt and pseudo rain jacket? The thing you're going to have to watch out for the next year or two is seeing a lot of cycling brands picking up on this, because they all realize that everyone's cycling more. You're going to see a ton of like quote unquote lifestyle urban commuting ranges, and they're just going to be at best boring, because they're basically going to try and take what everyone already wears and rebrand it. And that's not what people want. People want something that's like really coming from the culture of the sport. And I think it's going to come from taking risks and doing things that are a little bit tricky and interesting and new. I mean, that's what we tried to do with the shoe. Tell us if it's not. We're open to feedback all the time. But I think we need to see new things that are best in class, but also kind of embody the style of the sport in a unique way. They can't just be, badged up t-shirts and things that kind of try and export the brand. It has to export the culture of cycling outward. And that's a bit trickier.
So let's segue into getting kind of your outsider's take on the current state of cycling gear, cycling apparel, cycling fashion. Maybe I'll start by asking you a general question. What are your favorite cycling brands out there, and why? Who do you think is making cool stuff, is making interesting stuff?
Well, I'm going to sound really, really annoying to David, but I think he'll agree with me. I think so number one, I think right now I'm going to let everyone down and say I don't think anyone's really pushing the limits right now. And that's an
Hot take.
opportunity, but it's a bit sad. Yeah. I think we all just have to shut up and accept that Rafa really broke the mold on creating a new style for the sport of cycling, right? Like they allowed you to do the things David was talking about, like really, really dig in and think about what am I going to put on? How do I look cool? How do I dress in a way that feels a little bit more like me, but also still lets me be a cyclist? So they expanded the sense of style for cyclists to be, more premium, a little more stylish. And, I think a lot of companies have picked up on super cool ways of, expanding that. I think, to be honest, Pawn Normal's done an awesome job. They're very, very specific in terms of their style, which goes back to my point. It feels like I either have to be a Pawn Normal rider or not. Like I can't just buy a jersey or one item from them. I feel like I'll just be like excommunicated from one group or another.
That's a great take. That's a very
That's
accurate
correct.
assessment. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm learning. So you can see I'm learning here and there a little bit about it. But but then they're like brands like Universal Colors, right? Where I feel like it's more. It is what they say. It feels a little bit more democratic. It feels like it's trying to bring some of the simplicity and joy, and make things stylish without having to be overly complicated. So I think there's a lot of cool things I see. I'm always looking for who's bringing something that no one else has. And that's where I'm still left a little thirsty and hungry right now. I'll leave it to the post-pandemic, inventory problem. I think that's fair. I don't think it's fair to kind of say no one's being innovative. But when I started to see all of these collabs, Rafa and Palace, I realized that the risk taking was going, I think, in the wrong direction. It was kind of jumping on a lot of what people were doing on the street side. And it's fun and it's cool, but it feels to me like it took the eye off trying to really reinvent the sport or really do something that's never been done. And that excites me more. That's what drew me to chapter 3 was David's sense of bringing real style, and he did that, very early on, much more of a British style, not quite so Scandinavian, not quite so minimalist and stripped down. But I think there's a huge opportunity to do something totally new.
You've got a proven track record of doing something totally new. So it's an exciting time, and I think that I think you're right about some of the stagnation with cycling, and we're not too proud to say that a lot of times we choose our stuff just based on the cool look, whether the technology is necessarily the most innovative. So with some of the brands we like, if they sublimate a great pattern, we'll say that's a great jersey, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's pushing any envelopes.
There are, I think, maybe some brands that are pushing like the technical side, but then the aesthetic isn't there, and so it kind of gets overlooked. Like, and because we're a style focused podcast, I don't know who those brands are, but
ASOS Q36.5.
Yeah,
they focus on that, but I don't know if they really fit like what we'd want to wear. Yeah.
I disagree on Tony. I disagree on Q36.5. I think they have some nice stuff design wise.
Getting better.
Yeah, they're getting better for sure.
Yeah.
Some of the early stuff that I mean, not probably early, but early when it kind of came to Canada, I was really like, it's cool, and you read about the technology and all this stuff, and a lot of it was really,
Tony, I was just about to say, I think what's really interesting is we've joked about the fact, isn't it weird how this whole Gen X generation had connections to skating and street fashion before it existed? And primarily because we're Gen X, which means we grew up in the 1980s where it was starting to be created. So that's when BMXing started, skateboarding started to hit mainstream, mountain biking started to go in. So all these sports kind of that had never existed started to go mainline in 80s, which then allowed there were sports that were not team sports. They were not part of the curriculum. There were no clubs. It was a vehicle for you to be an individual and do something different. And with that came a style and a fashion and identity. And I still kind of stand by, I've always loved being a cyclist because we are, like you, Alex, as well. I love wearing a really lovely suit. I love wearing the best tech. I love kind of wearing different things for different activities, but that's my style. That's my cycling style. In the sense that I'm a bike rider, which means I'm essentially a creative in the kind of domain I live in, how I think of it, even though I was a pro racer. And I think and this is one of the James, to kind of almost take the essence of what James has kind of been talking about, is everyone keeps identifying themselves as a cyclist. But actually, it's much more interesting than that. This is a really interesting niche that has potential to do the opposite crossover and start to inform running. start to inform even soccer, football, it start to inform other sports and go, actually, well, cycling has a very cool culture. But we're trying to kind of, it's being piggybacked by the like Palace, genius. But anyway, that's my just that take and getting deep on that one.
Yeah, I was going to respond, Tony. I think you're right about the the performance stuff, and I wasn't even actually referring to that when I say innovation. That stuff has it has a limit, right? So you're always talking about like 1% faster at best. That's a big deal. 1% faster in a cycling race is even more impressive than a running race. And even there, like it's so incremental. I was talking about what David was referring to, which is you have a sport that's an individual sport. Granted, there are teams and there are sponsors, but if you compare that to the world of global football or soccer, like it is so regimented. There's so many rules and regulations about what you can and can't do that stylistically it's a graphic print, and maybe a collar change, and maybe the sleeve can change a little bit. The opportunity to do stuff different stylistically and be innovative stylistically in cycling, it seems to be that there's a much bigger opportunity to do that. And when I think about if David were writing today, having gone through the last 8 or so years of like developing his style even further, I don't think there's anything out there that he could be wearing that would express him. And so I think there is this kind of inverse opportunity to take the best in class construction. And by the way, I have to say, because it's only fair to do so, the level of aesthetics in the design world in cycling is very high. I mean, you compare that to some other sports that go, from very high to very low. In general, it's very high, right? There are good designers making good products. It's just not that stylistically varied. And it could be more. You could feel like you're wearing something that fits you, not wearing something that has been blessed by the brand that everyone in the community wears. And that was my point about Pas Normal. It's like, it's good stuff, but it's very narrow and it's very next door to Rafa and very next door to every other brand. I'd love to see stuff that goes much wider. Like, give me something that looks like a skater hopped on a bike. Give me something that looks like a dude came from dinner or, some sort of ball and hopped on a bike, tuxedo style. Whatever it is, like, give me a broader sense of like the opportunity to express yourself as a cyclist rather than fitting into a really, really narrow mold and saying, this is cycling. This is the only thing that can be cycling. And you can do it in pastel pink or pastel blue or pastel red, but anything else is not okay right now.
If the opportunity set is so large for disruption and innovation, why is no one doing it? And why is everybody playing it so safe?
Because I think genuinely because we have relatively quite a small industry going back to the beginning. And most of the people running the brand or the company are fans of a segment of the sport they're doing and don't want to disrupt it and love the codification and love the rules and actually aren't comfortable breaking those rules or going out or having a bigger bandwidth.
So you're saying it's our fault?
I'm saying it's your fault. I'm saying it's Cycling Fashion Week for creating the codification. No, but I genuinely, it's like I love dressing different, choosing the brands that fit kind of what I do and that activity and different things I do have done in the past, not so much now. But we don't nurture identity, individual identity in cycling road. We say in order to be part of us, you have to do what we do. But what about if we started to say, well, this is what we do, be more outgoing than kind of incoming? It's saying, actually, no, this is the most beautiful sport in the world. We love it. The stories are insane. The people are incredible. It's really interesting to be part of this. And yeah, we kind of recommend you wear this for doing this, and you might have to clean your white shoes. And so it annoys me if somebody's wearing socks the wrong length and if their white shoes aren't clean. But that's that's me in road cycling. But also, I like to then use a bike in the city and not have to ride a fixed gear bike. I like a fold up geared bike, which is super uncool. And then I go mountain biking and I love it. And I dress completely different from mountain biking. And I hang out with different people with different things. And then I can easily be invited to hang out with you, Alex, and we can wear beautiful suits. I like to think I'm a cyclist and we can do anything because we're the most interesting people in the world.
So I agree with you, David, that cycling is a very small community and in many ways it's very self-referential. It doesn't like to go out of its own little bubble, and it's also obsessed with its own history. Maybe James would understand this better than you, David, because you're Scottish and he's American, but baseball is kind of like that. It's a sport that's obsessed with its own history, and in a way that sort of impedes looking to the future. There's always the unwritten rules and things like that. And cycling, I find, is very, very similar to that. So maybe that makes kind of a higher barrier for innovation or for doing things differently.
I mean, baseball is such a great example. The uniform has a belt. Think about that. Like, really, like talk about like holding on to things from the past. I think even running went through this. Like there were a couple of key phases where like being a runner changed, right? Then there was the jogging boom, but you still had to wear like, split shorts that, were booty chokers. And then what happened to running that really broke it open? Around 2004, women took it over. And you know what happens when women get involved in a sport? It becomes more social. They start to look at all of the different ways that it fits into their life. They don't accept that the sport is their only identity. They accept that like they're going to take pieces of the sport and build it into a bigger identity. And I think what's happened in the last 10 years is that stylistically, a lot more men have kind of picked up on that. And they're like, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to be just a cyclist. I can also be a cyclist and a skater and a hockey player and a lot of things. And so you see that happening with men dressing differently and, being proud of having a sense of style and that not being considered to be feminine, that just being considered to be a new way that we are as, as men, intellectual masculine men also have a sense of style. So I think it'll come. I think it'll eventually come. And I think the fact that unlike another sport like baseball or even golf, right? Golf was super limited and elitist, and now everybody golfs. Well, cycling's even easier because I think almost everybody already has a bike, right? It's not like you have to like join a golf club to be golfing. You actually just have to have a bike, and so many people do. So there's going to be this eventual expansion and migration. I think what's going to happen is the winners of this in terms of kind of influencing, I don't mean winners necessarily financially, are going to be the ones that take the core of what cycling is and expand it and not take existing lifestyle and try and badge it up as lifestyle cycling or something like that. I think that's the risk that every sport's gone through is, all of a sudden everybody makes, subpar running shoes or really crappy gear and says, because we branded it with our cycling label, it's now officially, lifestyle cycling gear. That's going to get in the way of the expansion, but I think it'll happen. I think you'll start to see more people, and the city is where it's happening. Like we said, like that's where more people are going to choose to hop on a bike than hop in a car or a cab.
I mean, you're right. And it's really important to just for the overall health of a city is I find, I mean, I know it's different in places in Europe, especially the very famous like Copenhagen and Amsterdam, but like in Toronto, as an example, I've always said like, we need to sort of change the mentality around commuter urban cycling where you're riding a little slower and you're sort of going at a pace that is more comfortable to wear more regular clothes. Like that's always been a hindrance I find when I talk to people who don't ride a bike as a form of transportation is they always think of cycling as like this fitness sport. And then they'll see someone on their morning commute who is on a drop handlebar road bike in full kit with a backpack on, hammering at 35K down a busy street. Someone else will say, I'm going to the office. I can't sweat. We don't have showers at the office. And I say, we've got to kind of change that mentality. But then I do think kind of what you're saying also, if cycling itself that comes from maybe the road world or even the mountain bike world and stuff takes a bit of that technology and idea and adapts it to more street sort of business functional but fashion forward clothing, more people will actually just ride a bike because they don't feel, well, if I'm going somewhere that I have to shower, like, it doesn't have a shower for me. I'm going out to dinner. I'm going out to the symphony. I'm going to the office. I can't ride the bike because I'll be sweaty and all this stuff. It's there's a big place to make that change. And I think it's actually just, again, for the health of the city, being in Toronto, which has a pretty big car culture and stuff, it's important to try and convince people who genuinely wouldn't maybe ride a bike as in that form to do it.
Maybe people just need to discover Bromptons out here because
I actually think that would help.
No, I do. I'm serious. Like I think that would just help encourage that kind of riding. Cause like to Tony's point, a lot of my coworkers know, I'm a quote unquote cyclist who wears kit. And then when they see my commuter and I've got this, as Tony said, this like 40-pound Dutch style commuter, they're just like, oh, can you go very fast on that? I was like, no, and I don't want to, and it is just, there's still kind of that separation.
David and Matt Stevens have turned me into a Brompton guy. All right, we're going to wrap up the interview here. James and David, thanks very much for your time. James, there's something that we do on this podcast. It's a segment called Into the Canal, where essentially the canal refers to Montreal's Lachine Canal, where it's a location where we throw something that we really don't like about the world of cycling or cycling fashion into the canal. Basically, we've turned this into a verb as well. You can canal it. So any guest that we receive on the podcast, we usually give them an opportunity to throw something into the canal. Is there anything that you would like to throw into the canal from the world of cycling or cycling fashion?
Oh God, you're putting me on the spot. I'm going to say something that like people are going to hate me for, I'm sure.
Even better.
It's kind of the point.
I'm going to have a really lame example because I'm going to avoid the ultimate controversy. We'll pick that one up later. But I hate the mandatory sock thing that David talked to me about. Like
I love that.
Like I had the wrong socks on the first time I went riding. Like I had the wrong tan lines the first time I went riding. Like I like tall, either compression socks or tube socks or like just regular sports socks. And I mean, we make them at Chapter 3 and now that's a little bit more accepted. But that was just one of those freaking indicators to me where I was like, oh, great. Like Tony said, oh, great. I got to go through like this tunnel of knowledge for the next 6 months and figure out like how to wear my socks. And then what was the other thing I did wrong? Sunglasses were on the outside or inside. I don't know. I fucking did it wrong. I did it wrong somehow.
They have to be on the outside.
That whole thing, that's been our fun debate, right? Like, and I'm respectful of it because I totally understand that like embracing those, learning those, that's what makes you excited about it, gives the identity. I would just throw them all away at some point.
So just on the sock front, James, just FYI, not only is it a stylistic thing, but compression socks will actually have you sent to cycling jail because the Union Cycliste Internationale, which is the regulating body of cycling globally, these people are very concerned about socks overall. They at UCI headquarters, they spend a lot of time thinking about socks, even maybe more so than they spend on doping. And they have come up with a lot of rules that the socks can be more than a certain height. And compression socks are verboten.
I learned, that they are doping apparently.
Yeah,
because
it's
It's as bad as EPO. It makes you as fast as EPO. So
I showed up with compression socks or sleeves, and it was just like 18 frowns at me. I was like, all right, I'll be right back. Got to get my other socks on.
I think it's going to come out retroactively in a few years that Lance was wearing compression socks during these 7 Tour de France wins, and that was the determining factor ultimately.
He had them surgically implanted.
Yeah,
that's right.
He was just on the bike more than everybody else, guys.
All right, James Carnes, Chief Strategy Officer, Chapter 3, former Creative Director and Global VP of Brand Strategy of Adidas. Thank you so much for joining us on Cycling Fashion Week today. David Millar, CEO, founder, Chapter 3, friend of the podcast, repeat guest. Thank you very much for your second appearance on Cycling Fashion Week. And we will anxiously await the new releases from Chapter 3. We can find you on Instagram at Chapter 3. Follow David as well on Instagram at Millar Mind to get all the news about these new and exciting releases from Chapter 3. And hopefully we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
That was deep.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, that is it for another episode of Cycling Fashion Week. Thank you, David Millar, CEO, founder of Chapter 3. Thank you, James Carnes, Chief Strategy Officer at Chapter 3, for being very generous with their time, going deep on the state of the cycling fashion market industry. Really appreciated the interview with these two gentlemen. David, great friend of the podcast, repeat guest, and James, we hope, will also be a repeat guest. Thank you, Warren. Thank you, Tony. We will be back in a few weeks with more Cycling Fashion Week content. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Cycling Fashion Week. Send us DMs, messages. We will get back to rating your bikes. Or if you want to send those by email, you can do so at cyclingfashionweek@gmail.com. Thanks, everyone. See you in a few weeks.